first of all, how many people are still using, well, let's start with an easier question. How many people use a local development environment? Something like MAMP, Aqua Dev Desktop, Docker, Drupal VM, you know. All right, so it's, yeah, most people are using. I think there's one person who gave me something other than a thumbs up. Okay, so let's clear all those out. How many folks are using what I would call an old school local development environment, which would be something like Aqua Dev Desktop or MAMP, or even like, you know, installing everything yourself, okay, so just 2 of you. All right, so clear those out. How many are using a virtual machine-based solution? So not Docker, but a virtual machine, something like Drupal VM or something like that. All right, so a couple of you, so clear those out. And how many of you are using a Docker-based solution? All right, so quite a few of you. All right, clear those out. How many of you are using DDEV? Because maybe this will be a really short presentation if everyone's already using it. All right, so 4, 5. So 5 people are using DDEV so far. Okay, all right. That just gives me an idea.
I gave it a thumbs up, but I just switched from Lando to DDEV, and I'm not really comfortable with DDEV yet. So okay. I still need this presentation.
Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. So what I like to start out with is, so I'm going to hide my participants. I only have the one screen here, so I'm limited in what else I can see. But I always like to start off like, why? Like, what's the point of using something like DDEV? Because I used MAMP Pro for a long time. I've been doing, you know, web development for almost 20 years now, which is like ridiculous to even say out loud. And, you know, for probably 15 of those years, I was using MAMP or MAMP Pro. I was on Windows, you know, at the very early. So I think I was using WAMP or XAMPP. I forget exactly which one. But anytime I start learning something new, or I feel like I want to learn something new, or I feel like I should learn something new, I want to make sure like there's a point, like I'm gonna get something out of it. So I always like to make the case, like, why do we care about switching away from something we're comfortable with into something we're not comfortable with, and it's going to take time. And literally, I was just thinking about this morning, and I put something up on Twitter and LinkedIn this morning about, you know, I've been a long time PHP Storm user, and I've seen like a lot of folks starting to use VS Code, and I saw something the other day that VS Code did. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I'm starting to think to myself, is it time to like invest my time in learning VS Code over PHP Storm? So I kind of went through that process a few years ago, moving from MAMP Pro to something else, which eventually became DDEV. So yeah, so this is kind of this is where we start, right? Because as developers, if we get added to a team, or if we're a lone developer, and we want to get a professional local development environment up and running on our local, it can be really easy if you're starting from scratch with a brand new Drupal site, or it can be really time consuming if you're new to a team that's been up and running for a couple of years, the site's up and running, it uses, you know, not only are you using like the Apache MySQL PHP stack, but maybe there's a Solr search service there, maybe they're using Varnish, maybe you have to do some performance testing, you know, maybe they're using, you know, like a front end, a JavaScript front end that you have to be able to, you know, compile and build on your local, and all that stuff. To get all that stuff, hang on 1 second, let me just turn off my phone, because to get all of that stuff configured locally and running locally, that could be a huge task. And I remember talking to folks, you know, talking to folks who were starting new jobs, as well as talking to employers who were onboarding new employees. Like that first week that they're new on the team and they have to get up to speed and just get the site up and running on their local, that can be a huge pain. So tools like Drupal VM, Docker-based solutions like DDEV and Lando and Doxel, they go a long way toward solving this problem. And really, this is it's a problem of flexibility and requirements, right? Because any given project, you want your local to mirror the remote environments as closely as possible. And kind of the biggest lever in that is the version of PHP. If your live environment is running PHP 7.2, then all the other environments, local, dev, QA, all of those better be running PHP 7.2 as well. But you might also have another project that, it's still sitting, on Drupal 7, and it's, maybe it's on an older server that's still running like PHP 7.1. So now on your local machine, you need the ability to run PHP 7.1 for some projects and 7.3 for other projects, and multiply that by, all the other project requirements that you can imagine, some of them that are listed here, right? If your remote server is running Apache, you probably want your local to be running Apache as well. A lot of times, not many projects, I shouldn't say not many, but a lot of times projects are not sensitive to, Nginx versus Apache. But sometimes they are. So it's always best just to keep everything as consistent as you can as far as project. And you can even stick the word environment in here. So project environment requirements. If you have a team of 3 or 4 people and one person is your front-end developer, they might have a whole front-end tool chain going. And if you have to jump in and help out, you're going to want to use the same front-end tool chain that they are. So having all that stuff consistent across all environments is super important. I just ran into an issue the other day. So, as most people here maybe know, I don't know, I teach a long form Drupal class, and I've got a few students this semester who are using Doxel. And so I was trying to work with them on getting a fresh Drupal 9 site up and running in Doxel. And, I kept hitting this weird error, and I looked at it one night, after class, and what I realized was that the default database server that Doxel uses as part of their default set of containers is too old for Drupal 9. So it was literally a one-line fix once I found it. But I mean, that's a pretty good example of how it's so important that your environment requirements are consistent and correct, for that matter. In addition, you don't want to, as a developer, you don't want to be forced into an OS or a code editor. Code editors, not so much, but you don't want to be told that you have to develop on Windows because that's what everybody else is using. That's where our tools are. That's where the tools work or whatever. You want to use the tools you want to use. So, in this kind of fake equation, but in my head, it makes perfect sense. If you take all those project requirements and developer requirements, and however many there are, and you multiply that by the size of your project team, 4 or 5 people, multiply that, if you're an agency, on the number of projects that team works on, that's suddenly a metric ton of variables. And, if variables are not consistent, that's when, bugs creep in, and, the dreaded, well, it works on my machine, so I don't know why it doesn't work on your machine. That's one of the things that we hope to avoid. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. We're trying to make it so that environments are consistent, flexible and consistent per project. That's the key, per project. So if we were to blue sky this, and what, I don't have the chat open. Let me see. Let me just check the chat. Yeah, so I'm going to keep the chat closed because I only have one window. So feel free, if someone wants to, monitor the chat, and if there's any questions you think make sense to interrupt me for, feel free to interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll make sure I leave time at the end to answer any and all questions. Okay, so if we blue sky this a little bit and talk about what does a professional web development workflow look like, this is normally the diagram that I start with. This is a relatively simple workflow. There's no continuous integration, continuous development servers in here. This is a single repository model. The repository is over on the left. This is a remote repository, obviously. We have a bunch of environments here, and then we've got some workflow stuff on the left and right. So basically what in my opinion, I think what a lot of the people agree with me on, or I agree with a lot of people on, depending on how you look at it, is that work on the project should happen down here at the local level. So this is my laptop, your laptop, our team member's laptop, or computer. So, and really the only way to get changes into the project is through local, right? That's why there's only one arrowhead leading into the Git repository, meaning no one's going to SSH into the dev server, change a line of CSS and commit it there, because that goes against our best case process. Our best case process is code, and in Drupal 8.9, let's throw in the word config there as well. Code and configuration changes happen locally and get pushed into the remote. And then they get pulled into dev, where they get reviewed and maybe signed off on. Then they get pulled into a test or staging or QA environment where other stakeholders check it out. And if everything looks good there, then they get pulled into production. And hopefully by the time they get pulled into production, they've been pulled into enough other environments so that we know what's going to happen. We know if there's going to be a problem. We want this to be predictable and boring. And this is code flowing up. So it starts at the lowest levels and it flows up. Code flows up. The other side is data flows down. So once a site is launched, obviously we never want to take someone's local database and copy it up to production, because that's just, you're going to lose data. So that while code flows up, conversely, data and content files, the files directory in Drupal, that always flows down. If you need to refresh a dev environment, normally you're going to pull in the production database. Maybe it's a sanitized version of the production database, but you're going to pull that in here. Granted, you could, there could be arrows going from the QA environment down and down to dev or down to local. I'm only showing arrows going from production just to keep the diagram a little bit more on the simple side. But this is kind of what we're going for. We want a local development environment that supports this model. So let's break the environments a little bit more. So this is possible. It's becoming less, I see this less and less these days, but back 4 or 5 years ago, this was pretty much the norm, where not all environments were configured equally. So your production environment, might be running one version of PHP, but the QA or the dev environments might be using another. And this happens sometimes. If you're hosting, in your server closet down the hall, and you've got 3 different machines, then maybe you update production and you forget to update one of the other ones, or maybe they're at Rackspace or AWS or something. Maybe like your dev environment doesn't even have Redis, or maybe your production database, has MariaDB and your test is MySQL, just for whatever reason. And then down in local land, it's almost like the Wild West down here, because everyone's configuring their own. So maybe one developer has PHP 5.6. So you can see right here, this is pretty much worst case, but different versions of PHP all the way up the stack, different web servers, different databases. Some have Redis, some don't. I mean, this is just crazy town, and you're just asking for problems there. Once hosting like Platform and Pantheon and Acquia Cloud came in, as I call them, modern hosting or modern Drupal hosting, that kind of helped a lot with the remote environments, right? Because now all of the remote environments, if you're using modern hosting, all kind of move together. So if you're using PHP 7.1.17 in one of them, you're using that version in all of them. So that helped, for folks who are hosting on those platforms, that helped a lot. But the local stuff was still the Wild West. So let's blow up the local a little bit here. So let's say you have a 3 developer team. You have one person here who's kind of like maybe the site builder, maybe a little bit of development. Maybe this person is your developer, and they're also writing tests. And maybe this person down here, I'm sorry, no, the middle person, I should look over here. The middle person is your front end developer, and your third person here is a module developer and test writer. So their machines might be configured vastly different. Developer 1, developer 3, they haven't installed the front end tool chain. Only developer 3, has hat installed and configured. So, what happens when developer 2 goes off on vacation and we need a CSS change made to the site? That becomes a real hardship for developer 1, developer 3. So it would make a lot of sense if these 3 environments, if the local environments could be configured the same way. So number 1, so that everyone's using the same freaking version of PHP. Everyone's got the front end toolchain tools installed. Everyone's got the testing tools installed. Everyone's using the same version of the database, the same database software, just keep these things consistent. All right, I'm going to skip this stuff because I don't think we need to talk about that. So with all that in mind, what qualities do we want in a local development environment? And this becomes pretty easy, I think. All right, we don't want to have to spend 3 weeks learning a new tool or installing a new tool. We want something easy and quick, right? We want something that we can download, put on our machine, and be easy to learn. We want, we need it to be flexible configuration per project. Some projects might use Solar, some might not. Some might be on the latest version of PHP, some might not. Some might need a newer version of MariaDB, some might not. One project might need Postgres, who knows? But that needs to be configured per project. You might even be on some projects where you need different versions of Drush. So you need flexible configuration for a project. But once you configure a project, that configuration should be the same for your entire team. Like there should be no discussion about that. Maybe there's just one person on your team who's in charge of configuring the environment and they push the changes out and everyone pulls them in, fine. As long as everyone's using the same environment configuration. You want the tools to be easy, right? You don't want someone to have to learn. So not knocking Drupal VM, because Drupal VM is an amazing tool, but there's a lot to learn with Drupal VM. There's a lot of widgets and dials in Drupal VM. That's not a 2 or 3 hour thing. You sit down and become a master at it. And this goes back to kind of our statement at the very beginning. If you're bringing someone onto a project, or if you're coming onto a new project, you want to be able to get up and running fast and easily. You don't want to have to take 13 steps. Okay, well, first install Postgres, then install Solar, then do this, then forget about all that stuff. One person should set up that stuff, and then everybody should be able to utilize it. And then maybe some icing on the cake, integration with modern hosting platforms to help us support this type of workflow. So, okay, no big surprise. And I'm kind of being a little bit biased here because why DDEV, and technically the DDEV that we're talking about is technically called DDEV Local. DDEV Local provides all of these, but to be really even-handed, Lando provides all of these and Doxel provides all of these. Granted, to various levels of easy to learn and use, various levels of integration with modern hosting platforms, various levels of easy and quick installation, although they're all pretty easy and quick to install. They're all pretty damn flexible per project. You can get you can share the environment configuration with all 3 tools. So, I'm a DDEV person, so I'm being a little biased, but press me on, I'll tell you, if you're using any one of those 3 tools, you're in pretty good shape. So first and foremost, and this is something, again, Lando and Doxel do as well, but project requirements can be codified and shared. And actually they're codified. That's the way DDEV works, is it puts the configuration in code. And all you have to do to share them is commit them to the repo. So it's pretty darn easy to do that. And honestly, that makes us happy. That makes developers happy. Because if you have a team of 5, you don't need to worry about 5 people getting the environment configured. You need to worry about 1 person getting the environment configured, push into the repo, and then everybody else can do a git clone and do a DDEV start, and everyone's got the same configuration. And that's, forget about developer frustration, in getting stuff up and running. That's a huge like time and money saver for an agency or an organization. So that's a big win right off the bat. All right, so let's actually start talking about DDEV a little bit more. So a little more technically, it's Docker based. By default, you get 3 containers. And those of you new to Docker, a container, just think of it as a little small focused VM, virtual machine. I believe DDEV uses Alpine Linux, which is a pretty popular distribution for containers because it's super lightweight. But you're going to get 3 containers by default with DDEV local. So you're going to get a web container, and that basically means you're going to get a little tiny Linux machine that does nothing other than, I shouldn't say nothing, but its primary job is to run Apache or Nginx. You're going to get a database server. So a different virtual machine, little small one, like I said, that's running MariaDB or MySQL. And then a DBA container, database administrator container that's running phpMyAdmin. You get the ability to quickly configure, start and stop the set of containers for each project. So let's say you're working on 2 projects. Those projects are not sharing containers. There's a web container for project 1, and there's a web container for project 2. Web container for project 1 does not know anything about web container for project 2. These are completely independent containers, configured differently, and they're not going to interfere with one another. So the ability to quickly configure, start, stop containers for each project. Containers configured and shared on a per project basis. That goes back to the last slide. You configure these containers, and that configuration gets stored as part of your repo. As an example, project 1 is, we want to configure to use PHP 7.2 and a particular version of Nginx and a particular version of MariaDB. Maybe some other stuff, but those are kind of the broad strokes. So you configure that, you codify it, you put it in the repo, and boom, it's shared. And anybody who clones that repo for that project and uses that same configuration, they're going to be using the same configuration as you and everybody else. And easy to learn, you want commands that make sense. You don't want a huge command set. So on the command line, the application is called DDEV. So there are commands like Ddf Config. Guess what that does? It's not rocket science. Ddef start, Ddef stop. You want to connect directly to that container, to the web container, you do a Ddef SSH. So think of these containers, these are like servers, right? Think of it as a remote server. How do you connect to a remote server? You SSH to it. Well, it's a server, it's not really remote, but it's it's sitting inside of your laptop somewhere. You want to connect directly to it, connect to its file system and interact with it directly, Ddef SSH. In Doxel, it's instead of SSH, it's a bash command. So very similar tools. So this is like everyday stuff. Like every day, this is like your cadence. You're going to be doing this stuff a lot. And then every now and then, maybe you need to import a database. So for me, this is a heck of a lot easier than firing up phpMyAdmin and going through the UI. It's just as easy as using a drush SQL C call or SQL. Is it SQL? God, I even forgot how to do it just on the SQL command line. Is it just SQL? I think it's just SQ. Oh, someone can tell me in chat. But I haven't used SQL on the command line for a long time. But there's a Ddef import DB, there's a Ddef export DB that do exactly what you think. You give it a database dump file and it imports it. A describe function that basically tells you about your site, gives you the URL, tells you what other services are available, gives you the database connection information, stuff like that. And then obviously there's a help command that gets you all that stuff. So we're going to do a big demo. Maybe we'll start it today, or maybe I'll just answer questions today and we'll do the demo next week. So I don't have to stop the demo halfway. See what everybody wants to do in a few minutes. Let's talk about this fact that it's Docker based and there's containers. So those of you that are familiar with Docker, this might answer some questions. In Docker, and again, broad strokes here, you can basically build containers from these things called images that are, you can make your own image or you can just go grab an image off of a Docker Hub. And there's all kinds of images for various versions of Nginx or various versions of MySQL. But you select the image you want to use, and you spin up a container for the image. But remember, these are separate little Linux environments, all three of these. So by default, the web container doesn't know how to talk to the database container, which doesn't know how to talk to the DBA container. So there's this other layer on top of all this that's called Docker Compose. And basically what Docker Compose is it lets you group containers together so that they are automatically networked together. So the language or the syntax for selecting your containers, networking them together, exposing ports and all that stuff, that's what Docker is. Like if you learn Docker and Docker Compose, that's what you're learning, how to do all that stuff. And it's not super hard, but it's not going to be a 2-hour thing. It's going to take you, a few hours of initial investment to get going on it. And then it's probably going to take you, a bunch more time than that to become really proficient in it. Where tools like DDEV come in is DDEV basically provides a wrapper around all of that. So in short, we're going to tell DDEV that, hey, we've got a pile of code here, and I want you to create a set of containers for it. And here's the information I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you the name of the project. I'm going to give you where the document root is. A lot of times with Drupal, anyone who uses the Drupal recommended project composer template knows that the document root is by default at the web directory. And we're going to tell DDEV what type of project it is. Is it a WordPress project? Is it a Drupal 6 project? Is it a Drupal 9 project? Is it a generic PHP project? And really based on that information, DDEV is opinionated. DDEV says, okay, well, if you're doing a Drupal 9 project, here is a set of 3 containers that will work with Drupal 9. Now, are they the exact containers you want? Usually, yes. Sometimes no, but that's okay because you can start tweaking things if you don't like the defaults. But DDEV local's whole thing, and to be fair, Lando and Doxel as well, their whole job is to provide this wrapper around Docker to make it quick and easy to use. So you answer DDEV those 3 questions, and DDEV is going to basically write the Docker Compose file and download all these containers, get everything set up and get it up and running for you. And you won't need to learn any Docker commands. You'll basically learn how to, you'll need to know how to do a Ddf config and a Ddf start command, which, is pretty intuitive. So once you're there, what do you have? Well, if you're on modern hosting, then all of your remotes are kind of synced up. There's still a disconnect, between your remote environments and your local environments. But if your whole team is using DDEV local, and all that configuration is committed to the repo in this file, that all of your local development environments are consistent as well. So now going from the situation where we have just a ton of variables, we're basically down to one variable, or one place where we have to keep track of, if we change this, we have to change this. So it becomes a much more manageable problem to solve. And moving forward, the folks at DDEV are working on solving that problem as well. Right? So wouldn't it be great if you could configure your local and remote environments all from a single configuration file, right? Then basically you could manage not only the site configuration, but you can also manage the server, the remote server, or the environment configuration, all within the same repository. So we go on mute for 1 second real quick. I'm in airport lounge right now. There's an announcement going on. Okay, that was a good excuse for me to take a drink as well, of water, by the way. It's just water, I promise. Okay, so that's actually all the slides I have. So we could do some other stuff, but let me look at the chat. see if there's anything there that, if somebody wants to summarize for me. Okay, so no real questions, I don't think, right? Yeah, okay, thank you, Jamie, I see it. I don't know, I believe it's being recorded. I don't know.
Yeah, it's recorded.
Yeah, that's what I figured, okay. So, I mean, I guess I could do one example right now. Where are we on time? We've got about 20 minutes left. As far as I know, there's no outstanding questions, so I can use all 20 of those minutes for an example. Jamie, I could answer your question right now. A brief comparison between DDEV and Lando. So a couple of years ago, I decided to, I needed to evaluate, the various tools, and I focused on DDEV, Lando, and Doxel. No surprise there, because I keep mentioning those three. So basically what I did was I had all three installed on my machine. And in addition to teaching, I do client work, every day as well. So I had some clients on Lando, some clients on DDEV, some clients on Doxel. And I used all three of them for months and months, just to figure out which one I liked better and pros and cons and stuff like that. And I wrote this big blog post, which is on DrupalEasy.com, but it's a couple of years old at this point. So a brief comparison, they basically do the same thing, right? They're both wrappers around Docker. Where the differences lie, in my opinion, and so we're definitely in opinion territory when I talk about this. I believe Lando has better integrations with hosting providers at this point, where DDEV is more focused on integration with their own hosting called DDEV Live, which is bound to be, it's actually already pretty good. I've been a beta tester. I have a couple, actually not a couple, I have a site hosted on it right now. And it's all done via the command line. It's pretty sweet. There's multiple environments and things like that. And I think we're going to see this come to fruition on DDEV and DDEV Live before it comes to fruition anywhere else, in my opinion. So integration, with hosting providers is a big difference. And if you're looking for more, multiple hosting provider integration, the edge probably goes to Lando, although there is some integration with Pantheon that DDEV has, which I use almost every day. Where I would give DDEV a little bit of an edge is in ease of use and support. I know that I can get questions to my answers pretty darn fast, both in the issue queue and in the Slack channel for DDEV. They're just super responsive. And that being said, the Lando folks are responsive as well. They're just, in my experience, again, my opinionated experience, seems to be a little bit more, I can get faster turnaround with DDEV on support questions. The other thing, so the other factor I'll talk about real quick here is, I'll go back to this slide right here, is let's say that, and it's in configurability. Because all that DDEV is really doing is writing out Docker files, if you need to configure something at a very low level that DDEV doesn't allow you to do through its layer, you can always bypass it and start messing with these files directly. So you're not really ever limited by what you can configure in DDEV, nor in Lando for that matter. But where I think Lando has the edge is that there's a lot more things configurable at the Lando level than at the DDEV level. You can do a lot more without going into Docker Compose files in Lando than you can in DDEV. Other than that, I mean, performance, they're both using Docker underneath. So it all depends on, a couple of years ago, I would give the edge to DDEV because Lando for a while there you were stuck using a beta version of Docker or a pre-release version of Docker. It wasn't super stable and it was not great. That's all changed now. They both support the latest stable version of Docker. And the performance of Docker for Mac, and I'll talk about the Mac because that's what I'm on, is only getting better with every release. If you're on Windows and you get Docker and everything up and running through WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, the performance is fantastic. So, okay, there's a bunch more in the chat. Let me see.
See, Ian also has his hand up as
Yes.
well.
Okay, I see his stuff in the, okay, so let me finish up with Jamie's question, then I'll go to Ian. I just want to see if there's any comments in there. Thank you, Amy June, for putting that link in there. Yeah, Lando and Pantheon have had a close relationship for a while. Pantheon actually has their own branded version of Lando, or I've looked at it, but I haven't really played with it. I forget exactly what it's called. Oh, am I still here? I'm still here, right? I think I lost you for a second. Okay.
You still exist.
Yep.
Okay. Matt wrote, the main difference between Lando and DDEV local in my mind is that DDEV local uses bash scripts for configuration and Lando uses YAML. In some cases, yeah. It's not strictly bash. There is some YAML involved, but yeah, I know what you're saying, so I won't argue that point. The performance optimization difference between the two if you're on Mac OS due to file sharing. Yes, that can be mitigated. You can configure DDEV to work with NFS file system, which made a huge difference on my machine. Lando, you must share your entire home directory. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Your entire home directory.
With Docker for Mac, to improve your disk performance, you can actually limit what Docker has access to. Like by default, it's your entire home directory, like documents, downloads, whatever else. So when I was using just DDEV, I had it only going to my clients and my Drupal folder, and then user/.ddev, and my performance skyrocketed because it had, even though it wasn't mounted, it was watching less. But then I got on a project with Lando, and now my battery just dies because Docker has access to my entire home directory. And you can't launch a Lando project with restricted file sharing.
Oh, I did not know that. So that's a ding on Lando for sure. That's too bad.
Yeah. So there is a little bit.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that.
There was in the Esteemed Slack channel, the colleagues Drupal, it's called now. It used to be just Drupal. But I think that like Kaleem Clarkson just wrote, it was last week, it was like 8 days ago, and he was talking about not being able to find something because actually you can exclude folders from file sharing in Lando. So there is some kind of a, JD Leonard pointed it out. I don't have the link in front of me, but here it is, I got it. Boom, copy link, I'll put that in the sidebar. So I think you can prevent it from sharing. I haven't done this. Your mileage may vary. There's the link.
Okay, sorry about that. There's some background noise there. I put myself on mute, but okay. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to add anything more to that discussion about sharing, about mounting Lando versus DDEV. I think there's a lot of good stuff in the chat as well there. But let me, so Ian, let me go back up to where you asked your question here. Can I do the walkthrough install example in online doc? I've run it several times. Keep getting the Nginx 403 error. I think the WP code is not being, so what's the WP code?
WordPress code.
WordPress, okay. Okay. So you're talking about, so yeah, I think you took my full class at some point, right?
Say again?
So which walkthrough are you talking about? My walkthrough.
I'm talking
or
about the
DDEV?
online DDEV doc. It has
So
a
let
quick
me-
start for WordPress, a quick start for Drupal 8, Drupal 9.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. So this is in the DDEV read. We're gonna read the docs. I'll just go here and it'll pop. There we go. Just guide me to where I'm going to find these instructions.
I'm on my phone. Let me see if I can find it.
It looks like they have been extending their integration. I haven't played with the Acquia platform integration yet, but actually I think both of these are in, I think that platform is actually in beta right now. I'm not sure that's actually in the full version. So let me see database. The Zoom bar always gets in my way. .com/drud/DDEV. Getting started. Okay, so this WordPress quick start right here, this one's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So based on Bedrock, which is a template. All right, so let's start with some simple stuff. Real simple. Which DDEV? Confirm you have DDEV installed right there, right? So that's, you should get a path back, tell you it's installed, then you can do something like DDEV version. So I'm using 1.6.16, which I believe is the latest release version, but to be honest, I haven't checked in a couple of weeks, so, and I haven't gotten a message. Let me see. Oh, okay, so I'm a point, a maintenance release off. There's 1.16.7, which was released a week ago, but I don't think it's going to matter for this example. So Ian, you can do something. You can, you're sure that you have DDEV installed, and if you do a DDEV version, no error messages, and you get reasonable output.
That works.
Okay, that works. Okay, very good. So let's create. So basically, we got to create a new empty directory. So let's do that. So let's do a mkdir wp cd wp for WordPress. Next step is going to be a DDEV config, and we can take this. Here's the three questions I mentioned earlier. Right? If you do a DDEV config, it wants to know the type of project, which is going to be WordPress. If it has a doc root and where it is, it's going to be web. And we're going to create the doc root if it doesn't exist, which it doesn't. And by default, the name of the project will be the name of this directory, which is just WP. All right. So when you do that, it creates an empty doc root. So we don't have, but actually put stuff in there. Wow. Surprised by that, but okay. And then if you look inside the DDEV directory, we have a config.yaml, and this is kind of where the basic config for this set of containers is going to come. So we'll do that. And then the next step should be a DDEV start. So let's run that. And this is basically going to spin up the containers. If this is the first time you're doing this, then it probably has to download the containers. But then it will cache those locally. All right, so at this point we have containers running, and so just one note, on my machine I have it configured so I never create the DB8 container. I use a different tool for that. So I basically, instead of having three containers per project, I only have 2 containers per project. And then DDEV has a router container as well that runs regardless. There's one container regardless of how many projects you have running at any given time. But once the web server's up and the database server's up, you're going to get a URL, and this is not going to be very interesting because we have no code yet. So no big surprise there. All right, so the next step is basically to run a composer create, or I should say a DDEV composer create, which is a composer create project on this roots bedrock. And anyone who's not familiar with this, I'll just go to Packagist. Is it roots? Bedrock, there we go. So it's basically, it's similar to the Drupal recommended project template, but it basically gives you a WordPress boilerplate. So this will take a minute or two because it's going to download a bunch of stuff. So let's get that going. So I'm going to guess, Ian, that your issue has to do with the config file for connecting to the database. So we should be able to figure that out in the next few minutes. Now, that being said, I'm no WordPress expert. I have done some stuff in DDEV with WordPress, so that's why I'm fairly certain we should be able to figure this out. So while that's doing, let's just take a look here. Bedrock uses a configuration technique, which is unusual. So in the project root, we're going to add this stuff. Once that's done. While that's going on, check the chat again. So Paula, I see your question. So let me see if I can't figure out what you're asking here. DDEV version, you didn't see all the info. So do a DDEV version, but without the dash dash, Paula, and tell me if you get version numbers back. Okay, so our composer crate is just about done here. So I'm going to go into the .env file and get this stuff in there. Where's it going to be? In the project root. Okay, so ls-al, there's the .env file. And I'm just going to do this at the bottom, just so I don't have to. I think it'll be all right if I do that. Yeah, it should override all that other stuff, hopefully. Yeah, okay, so Pawn, I see your stuff in the chat, so that looks good. So you have DDEV installed properly there. All right, so my site is just WP. So I'm gonna hit that, Control X. Okay, all right, give me a sec, Pawn. I will circle back to you if we can get this working. Okay, so then let's do a DDEV restart just in case. Oh, thank you, Matt. I'm following along now. What's happening in the chat there? All right, so let's see if that gives us something other than forbidden. Example domain. This domain is wp.ddev.site. wp.ddev.site. So we're kind of have, oh, why did it went to example.com? Let me close that and let me try DDEV launch from here again. All right, so I think there's just some configuration that we're missing. So let me ask Ian. Ian, are you seeing, is this what's happening for you? What's happening for me?
No, it may be that I haven't installed the Bedrock piece. What I'm getting is an Nginx 403 error, which seems to be telling me that the WordPress code base is not installed. And when I look in the web directory, when I SSH in, that is an empty directory. I'm not familiar with WordPress, so I'm not really sure what it should look like, but it seems to be empty.
It should give you an installer page.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
When you were in that .n file earlier, you left the original. Look up.
Is that going to mess things up?
That that WP underscore home up there is probably what you're getting.
Ah, yes, thank you. Look at that. Okay, so if I update this to my DDEV address, should that work?
Well, you've got it twice, and I don't think, because if you look
Oh,
down below, it is
thank
again.
you.
So I don't think one is not overriding the other or something.
Okay, I got it. Let me just comment out the other ones. Name, user, password. Host is up there. Okay, let's try that. Site URL. Oh, yeah, look at that. So you know what? I probably should have put this stuff up top. So let's do that in my haste. So, okay, get rid of all that. Thank you. Who's that, Sean? Appreciate that. Okay, so now I want to comment that out. Okay, so name, user, password, host, and the WP home I have set, and then site URL is going to connect it. Okay, so let's see if that does it. Oh, good job, Pana. Thank you, Matt, for your help. Well, no, I don't think I can do it. I think I just got to do a DDEV launch again. By the way, DDEV launch, all that does is just opens the default browser at that URL. So I could do open URL, or I could just type DDEV launch. So DDEV launch isn't doing anything special. Yeah, there we go. There's the WordPress install page. So Ian, the instructions work. So I would, so when this step, the DDEV composer create root/bedrock, this is when you get the code.
Okay.
Right? So this step basically will, this will basically copy down the composer template, which is roots bedrock is a composer template. And then once that gets copied down to your local, composer install runs. And that's what's going on here. And composer install is when all the dependencies get downloaded. And one of the dependencies is WordPress. Oh, sorry, WordPress.
Okay.
So, basically if you follow where did it go? Not those. These instructions to the letter. And the only thing that's not listed here, which I'd put, just make sure that you put this stuff at the top. And, I commented out the duplicates. So that's the only thing I did that's not listed here. So hopefully that will answer your question. If not right now, then the next time you try it.
Yep, I'll give it another shot.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Of course, you're welcome. All right, so we're out of time. All right, so 2 weeks, I'm gonna do another example. The example I actually prefer is I like to clone an existing site. So I've got an existing site. We're gonna clone it. We'll go through it step by step because we'll touch a lot more of the DDEV commands. And then if we have time, I'd like to show something else which I've been playing with, which is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Gitpod. Gitpod's a really cool service that basically you point it at a repository. I'm going to point it at a GitHub repository. It will get that site. It will basically load that repository in a remote development environment with VS Code. And then another gentleman in the Drupal community, Ofer Schall, Ofer figured out how to get DDEV to run inside of Gitpod. And then, so I've taken what Ofer did and I kind of streamlined it a little bit. So we can actually get the demo that I'm going to show you in 2 weeks in 5 or 10 minutes, get that running in Gitpod on the cloud in a full development environment with VS Code and Git and everything. And that basically means you don't have to install anything on your machine other than a web browser. So that's really, really cool stuff, if you ask me. Is there a command to blow? So Ian's asking me this as a DM. But Ian, I'm going to assume that you meant this for everyone. And is there a command to blow everything away to ensure a clean reinstall? Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll talk about this next week, but I'll show it to you now. And you know what? I'll do it right now for the site. So I'm going to do a DDEV remove. So this is that WP site. Let's say I don't want this. If you do just a DDEV remove, this is like a DDEV stop. All this does is spins down the containers. It keeps your database. It's non-destructive. If you add a remove data, this stops your containers, removes your containers, and deletes your database. But if you do it this way, DDEV will still make a backup for you of your database. It will do a snapshot. But if you do an omit snapshot, then this really just kills your database with no backup unless you made one manually previously. So normally what I want to do when I want to eradicate a DDEV site from my machine, I run this. And you can see it's going to remove the, right there, it remove the volume. And then once that's done, then let me just get out of this, cd go up on directory so I don't end up in the trash. Then I can come over here and I can drag this to my trash. And it's completely gone. There's no lingering data. It's not taking up any space. Where is it? There, now it's gone. So that's the best way to completely eradicate a project. So there's no lingering data on your machine. Alrighty, sound good? Any final questions?
I'd also make a point for Docker. If you really want to do a full cleanup, there's also the command line Docker system prune and Docker, your different prune commands.
Yeah,
So
DDEV
really make
actually
sure
has
that
DDEV has a DDEV, is it remove images, I think? Hang on, I got window in the way. DDEV. That's DDEV help. There is a DDEV command that removes images. Downloaded it, like it kind of, because every time you download an image, it caches it.
Hidden behind delete. So do DDEV delete -- help.
Thank you. Thank you. I knew it was there
I
somewhere.
always have to look it up too.
Yeah.
I think. No, it's somewhere.
Yeah.
I have no idea where.
In containers.
Yeah, let me DDEV remove image.
Oh, maybe it's remove -- help.
I wonder if it's like a hidden command.
Yeah, it's a subcommand that I always have to look it up or go on a search.
Yeah.
Does that command also remove like the dangling networks and volumes and everything like that as well?
No, it just cleans it up. So every time that there's a new DDEV release, there's new images tagged. So you could end up with, like DDEV web server 1.15, 1.16, 1.17. And then as you upgrade, those like images aren't needed anymore and it cleans up that. So it's like a very concentrated version of system prune.
Right, okay. There's a volume RM. Oh no, because those Docker commands. DDEV delete images, delete space images.
That's it. It just doesn't. That's it. It doesn't show up in the help though. We need to make a feature request to Randy.
Yeah, it doesn't show up in the help.
Oh wait, there it is. Available commands.
Oh, right there. You're right.
Nice.
That's the one. Yeah, and this, so this thing is actually a lifesaver because I didn't, I probably went 6 to 8 months without knowing, and this is actually a relatively new command, but there's ways to get rid of these images and clear like the Docker cache or your local of these images. But the first time I did this, I think I regained like 12 gigs of space on my hard drive.
Yeah, I run the system prune commands a couple of times a month or a couple times a year because it gets pretty bad.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna finish up here with Pana. So Pana, can you remove DDEV Docker completely? Yes. DDEV depends how you installed it. So I would go back to how you installed it, and it's probably on the DDEV documentation page. But like I installed mine on my Mac with Homebrew, so there's a Homebrew command to remove it, and then the Docker for Mac there's an uninstaller as well. But you want to do them in the right order. I think it's probably makes a lot of sense. So, completely uninstall DDEV first and then uninstall Docker. DDEV Drupal 8.9 basic commands. Would this doc be available? No. So this doc that I kept on showing, this one right here, this is, I actually make this available to the folks who take my paid class. So sometimes I refer to it as why I had it open. So I'm sorry about that. It's actually, this is kind of a summary of, and if you guys don't mind humoring me, I wrote a book on DDEV, and this is basically a short version of that book. And the book is, it's $7 for the electronic copy. So, and it has more stuff. And actually, there's a new version of the book coming out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And I was just talking to my publisher the other day.
Wow, I should have waited.
Well, just email me, and I will send you the updated copy when it
It's
comes
I'll
out.
buy the new one. I'm
Okay. I'm happy to.
Somebody needs it.
Yeah, only have to buy it once. If anybody wants a copy of the updated copy, just let me know, and I'm happy to. I'm not like buying my new yacht with the proceeds of the DDEV book.
This is funny too, because look what else just came from Amazon. You guys are sitting next to each other in the headshots.
Oh, there you go.
I had the old one. This is the new one. So
who wrote that?
Stay up to date.
Funny because I was like, wait, who wrote that?
Yeah, who wrote that cookbook? Is that?
I think that was me.
Was it you, man? That's awesome. I should pay attention more. That's probably part of the problem. All right, very good. So I guess
What else are you going to show though? You're going to do you're going to spin up the Git pod, right? We got to see this demo.
So in 2 weeks, I always like to demo just the clone an existing site, because the problem that I hear from clients and developers is it takes me so long to get up and running on a new project. So we're going to do a demo of, what does it take to get an existing site up and running in DDEV? And like I said, that'll allow us to demo a lot of the various DDEV commands. And then from there, I'll demo the Git pod stuff. So yeah, so that's 2 weeks.
All right. I'll be back.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good to see you.